Welcome to Data Break by 55, the podcast where we break down the complexities of today's global marketing industry. I'm your host, Nancy Edwards, marketing lead here at 55, and your go-to wrangler for expert insights on marketing and data analytics from around the globe. Each month, we invite experts in the MarTech space to join us for a deep dive into the technical solutions that are shaping the future of both businesses and marketers. With topics ranging from advanced measurement to generative AI, our podcast covers the latest insights and trends in the marketing industry. So sit back, relax, and take a break with us as we dive in. I'm so excited to introduce our guest for today's episode, the Data Privacy Maze. We're looking at how marketers should navigate evolving privacy regulations and technology, and I have 55ers Rico Dittrich and Julian Litvak here with me today. Rico is a project lead and global privacy ambassador here at 55. He brings a wealth of experience working on accounts big and small to influence technical innovations through a privacy-centric approach. And Julian has strong expertise in all things data analytics with significant work done in Google Analytics 4. He has facilitated several large migrations to the new platform, which boasts really interesting privacy-forward features that we're excited to talk about today. Before we jump in, Rico, I'd love for you to share a little bit more about your background and your work at 55.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Well, as you said, my name is Rico Dittrich. I'm a project lead here based out of New York City. Been working with 55 since November 2021. And what I've been doing at 55 primarily is looking at a lot of the Google Analytics implementations, both Universal and GA4, as well as other GMP suites. And beyond that, customer data platforms, but also content management platforms. And I have been the privacy ambassador for quite a little bit. Before 55, I actually worked at Google for over 4 years in the measurement and attribution space, but also ad sales. And I had a similar position at a consulting firm in Germany. I'm so really excited to be with you today. And Julian, I'll pass it over to you to introduce yourself.
Awesome. As Nancy and Rico alluded to, I'm Julian Litvak. I'm a senior data analyst here at 55. I've been with the company for nearly 2 years now, and I have about 4.5 years of experience in the industry. At 55, I help a lot on the GA4 migration standpoint, helping our clients get up and running on the new tool as we're navigating through the transition from Universal Analytics into Google Analytics 4, along with helping them continue to enhance their data collection and analysis that they do through their web tracking. Previously, I've also had expertise in different areas around SEO and paid search as well. So I do bring a whole scale approach to the digital marketing landscape and hoping to share some insights on how privacy is going to be changing and impacting these different tools that we're used to seeing in the future. So excited to be here and get in this conversation.
Thank you, Julian. We're so excited to have you with us today. Today's episode, we're going to be unraveling the privacy paradox. So we will be exploring what these new privacy regulations and technologies really mean for marketers and how we can navigate the shifting landscape while keeping user data safe and our campaigns effective. And both of you obviously come with so much experience to help us really dive into the topic. But to kick things off, I want to ask, what should marketers be aware of as we get farther along into this phase out of third-party cookies?
Yeah, I think this is a great question to kick off with, Nancy, particularly when we think about where this is coming from. So privacy and data protection is something that really kicked off around 2016 to 18, primarily through the introduction of legislation with the General Data Protection Regulation in the European Economic Area, as well as the CCPA, which is very much considered a GDPR equivalent in California. Around the same time, Apple introduced intelligent tracking prevention in their Safari browsers in all of their operating systems and devices, which restricted third-party cookies. And then after that, all of the other browsers followed suit with Firefox's ETP, with Edge, and now even Google Chrome will be killing off third-party cookies in Q3 of this year as per planning and current timelines as of today. And then on top of that, user behavior also changed due to the legislation and the technology options. Users started caring more about their digital footprint. For example, in the United States, about 25% of users are using ad blockers right now. This number is rising. So these are really the where we're coming from and what's been brewing in the market over the last 7-8 years. And now these challenges are obviously reflected in what marketers need to do now, like The number one priority is probably third-party data becoming less and less accessible and even less compliant. There will be fines. For example, we all remember the Sephora case in summer 2022, where CCPA was for the first time applied to a company and they had to pay a fine to the Data Protection Authority of California. In Europe, we see fines that are even much larger. Meta had to pay over 1 billion euros for their data collection behavior. So compliance is huge. If your data collection is compliant, make sure that data is set on a first party footprint. Make sure that data is robust and resilient. And, think about conversion tracking, making sure you connect the dots between ad clicks and conversions, make sure your audience is safe, and then performance measurement, especially how can you see how your users interact with your experience on websites or apps. So there's a bunch of challenges coming out of this.
You just covered a wide range, and when we think about Google Analytics specifically, it's a traditional, very strong tool in the marketer's tool set. I think every marketer probably has interacted with Google Analytics at some point. And the move to Google Analytics 4, I'm sure, was a huge lift for a lot of brands. Julian, could you give us a high level intro to Google Analytics 4? What has changed? And also give a little bit of information on why it is now better suited to address the challenges posed by this third party cookie phase out.
Absolutely. So Google Analytics 4 is the latest iteration of Google Analytics. A lot of marketers may be familiar with Universal Analytics. That's the previous iteration. Google Analytics 4 has been created to serve the evolving needs of digital marketers with a high emphasis on and a focus on privacy compliance to make sure to change the analysis type that we're looking at in this new tool to make sure that it's future proof and taking into account a lot of these different changes that are happening in the digital marketing landscape. Some of the key differences and core features of Google Analytics 4 include the shift from session-based to event-based data modeling. In GA4, we use an event-based model that allows for a comprehensive analysis of how users are interacting across all your websites and apps, as opposed to relying on session-based. We also have enablement of cross-platform tracking that allows you to go from your phone to your website. That's a high emphasis in this new GA4 tool. There's also enhanced data privacy controls that we're going to be diving into a little bit more deeper, really highlighting user control over the information you're collecting. So you have the ability to edit it, delete it, set certain restrictions so that you're compliant looking to the future. It also has new features utilizing AI capabilities such as predictive analytics, and a lot of the new attribution models also include uses around machine learning. In terms of how this relates specifically to cookie deprecation, Google Analytics 4 has a high emphasis on first-party data collection. It's something that with the deprecation of cookies, we're going to really focus on getting the data that you collect to be as high quality as possible. And Google Analytics 4 is a great tool in order to utilize that first-party information. GA4 often allows for filling in some of the gaps that are going to be left through these data privacy regulations by utilizing machine learning models. And that way they can take trends that they see and run it through their models to give more information around data that might not be collected because of the regulation restrictions. Additionally, the last point that I want to highlight again is that GA4 is geared towards privacy-centric approach. It does give the users of the tool a lot of different capabilities in order to have management over what information is being collected and making sure that we are in accordance with regulation. So those are a couple of the core features and kind of some of the highlights around how it's going to be addressing this issue, which is the top of everyone's mind with cookie deprecation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Julian, for giving us a little bit of the download on Google Analytics 4 and why it's been introduced at this time. And Rika, the context on the industry and what's been going on to kind of bring us to this point has really helped. I would love to know, as we're moving into this cookieless future and beginning to take on some of this new technology, what questions should chief marketing officers be asking and who should they be collaborating with to make sure that tools like Google Analytics 4 and other strong privacy tools are in place?
I would go even further and take an additional step back as a C-suite. What questions do you have to ask about data protection and privacy in general? And I think that's have a strong legal backup. For example, having inside or outside corporate counsel that's really specialized in data collection, data processing in the digital space is really important so that they're able to advise and consult you on the most recent developments in legislation. The space is evolving fast. In the United States, one state after another is passing new legislation, and it's important that your attorneys can advise you because that'll trickle down, which is why my next point is really thinking about data protection. In Europe, it is mandatory for each organization to have a data protection officer. In the United States, people should start evangelizing that concept. Even if it's not a formalized position or a full-time role, there should be a representative that always thinks about privacy and data protection and puts that first. And all of the decisions that are made in the business have a privacy and data protection aspect to it. Those are the two primary things about like the legal aspect to a certain extent. I would say data governance is super important as a third point. Make sure that you collect consent from the users on your website or in your app, and that your data collection practices are compliant, and that you have regular reviews. Something that we recommend a lot is every 3 months, you should ensure that your processes are up to date, that they're compliant, that they make sense. Many organizations these days collect so much data, but they're not actually using it. Only collect the data you need and put it to relevant use. And then last but not least, I would be like, are we providing experiences to our users that are relevant, that are compliant, and that, offer a value exchange to a certain extent? These are the questions that I would have top of mind as a CMO to my own organization.
That's great. And to build off a few of the points that Rico mentioned, I think it's also important to have a full understanding of what data is being impacted by the deprecation of these cookies, really knowing where the gaps are going to be and where we can fill in that third-party data that is going away with other alternatives. That leads into an additional question such as, can we fill in those gaps with first-party data? Can we fill in those gaps with machine learning and AI modeling? These are really important questions to keep top of mind so that you have a full understanding along with data compliance and privacy regulation.
Wow. Thank you both. I think that was a really great, well rounded response. Thinking about how do you loop in your legal teams, as well as to your point, Julian, where the gaps might be in your organization when you're making these changes and switching over to a new tool. I know one concern that we see often is worries about maintaining tracking and engagement without third party cookies. Can you offer some immediate strategies and or adjustments that digital marketers should be considering to address tracking and engagement concerns?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the first things I can think of is server side tagging. It's also known as server to server tracking or conversion APIs by some media vendors, which enables a more direct connection between the user behavior on a website or in an app and the vendor server that the data is stored on, as well as control by the marketer to actually impact the data that is being collected. So it's very much higher control, higher privacy, independent from third party cookies is really a solution that we all should look into, whether that be tag management or, conversion tracking with media vendors that you can integrate. So it covers user behavior, digital analytics, marketing, advertising alike. In terms of the audience engagement, I think it becomes more and more important to place emphasis on the value exchange, collecting that first party data directly from your consumers is sometimes why it's called zero party data, because the users willingly provide their information to you as a marketer or as an organization. And if you provide that value exchange reasonably, then people are more willing to give you that information. And with that, you can build a data set that will last you, that will help you build loyalty, that will help you build lookalike audiences, etc. And then very importantly, I think we haven't talked too much about this today, is data warehouses and customer data platforms. Data warehouses have been around for a very long time, and they've been used for collecting data and storing it in one repository. The advent of customer data platforms is not so long ago, and they really enable data structuring, transformation, and making it actionable. So you can use it for audiences, for campaigns outside of the CDP itself. And that's something, if you build that on first party data, you have a lot of new possibilities to strengthen your advertising efforts.
Yeah, and Rico covered a lot of great options. I want to circle back to that 1P data collection. Definitely going to be a highlight moving into a cookieless world, encouraging that value exchange through things like newsletter signups, account creations, content downloads. Users want to feel like they're getting something when they give you access to their information. And it's going to be an ongoing process of figuring out what works best for your consumers and what doesn't. But getting that user base of 1P data will be incredibly important. Along that, we can utilize tools like Google Analytics 4 to have a good understanding of our user behavior on our sites. Having good tracking set up in order to understand where users are navigating through our e-commerce platform, where users are looking at, and the best methods for reaching them. That's all information that can be gathered through a one-party basis and then utilized and analyzed in tools like Google Analytics 4. And then finally, I would say exploring predictive analytics and AI. That's also going to be a good tool to fill in some of those gaps that are going to be left through the increased scrutiny around privacy. Models can take a small subset of users and expand the interactions that they have to get a more holistic approach to the total user group that's coming to your site and interacting with your brand. So a couple of those points are key to keep in mind when to maintain the same level of quality of audience tracking and engagement that you have right now.
It does sound like there are a lot of solutions being put in place to help combat these concerns and worries that a lot of marketers are expressing when it comes to the deprecation of third-party cookies. Julian, I appreciate how you mentioned first-party data and the value that that'll have now that we're moving away from third-party. I'm also interested to know specifically with Google Analytics, what are some of the tools available to manage user permissions and user consent?
Absolutely. There's been a number of changes made to Google Analytics 4 from its previous iteration, Universal Analytics, to highlight this importance of privacy. One of those is being data collection based on consent. That's tying back to those CMPs, those consent management platforms. GA4 has a great integration with those platforms to be able to enable data collection based on user consent, which is going to be key as more regulation hits around the world. We also have more control over our data that I've alluded to a few times. So in order to make sure you understand what you're collecting, you have the ability to change the amount of data that's being retained in the site. For instance, if you only want to hold a certain amount of data for a time, you have the ability to set those restrictions around the data they're collecting in Google Analytics 4. To that point, it's also easier than ever to go through and delete data. If there is something that's overstepping the bounds of privacy, then it makes it very easy to go through and alter the data you're collecting to make sure that you're aligning with regulation. Also, the shift to event-based data, an event-based data model allows for a more granular control over what data is being collected. Marketers can actually design events in a way that avoid collecting sensitive information, focusing on interactions that are relevant to campaign performance without compromising user privacy.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like consent management is a very complex piece of the privacy puzzle. Are there any practical steps or best practices that digital marketers can embrace to stay on the right side of consent management and make sure that they're continuing to uphold these laws while also maintaining their user trust?
Yeah, great question. So I think the first few steps I've already mentioned previously. Get a good legal team. Beyond the legal team, make sure that every organization in your company is at least aware of privacy and data protection practices and compliance levels to a certain extent. And then when it comes down to really day-to-day operational business, make sure you have a functioning content management platform. Some of the names out there, OneTrust, Didomi, Catch, there's a whole bunch of them. Very competitive market, really. Use one of them. Make sure you go through all of the legal hoops and make sure you update them too based on your geography. For example, the law that applies in California or in Texas or in New York State are very different. Make sure that that's adapted. Additionally, make sure that's reviewed regularly. I think I just mentioned that because cookies pop up. Some vendors like Google or Meta, for example, introduce new cookies, sunset old cookies, and the names and their lifetime. So it's important that that's regularly updated, including vendor reviews. For example, if you add a new tag or pixel to your website or app, make sure you are aware of what it tracks, what data it collects, what cookies it drops, and that that's reflected in your content management platform too. On top of that, always keep in mind what's going on in your jurisdiction. The laws are constantly changing. In Europe, there's lots of movement. For example, the French, the UK, and some other data protection authorities, they publish rulings. They talk about the investigations that they're conducting into certain organizations and companies. Here in the US, there's a lot of talk around HIPAA and healthcare and data sharing in that area. Always stay up to date on the industry developments to make sure that your consent model or your consent system is refined. And at the end of the day, every organization makes slightly less strict or stricter decisions. For example, I know clients where Google Analytics is really strictly necessary, like that digital analytics platform is exempt from consent as an opt out option. And in others, everything is subject to consent and the user has the option to opt out, right? And then lastly, a very practical advice. If you see something, say something internally at your organization. If you see a data practice that you don't agree with, give feedback, flag it with your corresponding cross-functional stakeholders, review it internally. And in that case, it'll always be made sure that, it is up to date and that it is compliant according to internal policies as well as privacy legislation.
Yes, I love that sentiment. If you see something, say something. All these rules are changing, the technology is changing. It is important to foster communication internally and to have these cross functional groups and stakeholders that are able to work together to figure out solutions that work best for the organization and best for their consumers and their customers. I'd love to hear more about some of the personal experiences you've both had working within this field and helping clients to navigate all this changing technology and legislation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to name any names, but definitely one of the organizations that I work with, they quite regularly get claims from consumers in California accusing them of tracking and collecting data even after the user denied consent. And this is very interesting and impactful because, that gives them a lot of legal headaches. But at the same time, us as technical experts, we have been advising them for a very long time on how to do well, and they're most definitely doing good and better. They are using a consent management platform, but even making sure that that is 100% functional requires a lot of attention and a lot of effort invested into that. So in that specific case, we've been working very hard and long hours to ensure that they're compliant 24/7 and for all scenarios, for all states of the US.
Yeah, and touching more around a specific use case that some of our clients have been looking forward is that predictive analytics and AI modeling capability that Google Analytics 4 offers. Some of the new features that are being utilized are things like the data-driven attribution model. This utilizes machine learning in a privacy compliant way to more accurately attribute those conversions and purchases for when users come to the site, making sure that all the different touch points along a user's journey are being considered, and then filling up any of the gaps that it has in the data with that machine modeling. And there's been a big emphasis on getting that up and running for our clients to make sure that they can have the most accurate understanding of how users are getting to their site, what are the purchasing patterns, which different platforms and channels are users actually coming through for and should be credited with the conversions that they're happening. And that's all because of these new machine learning tools that are enabled in GA4. So it's definitely something that I'd like to highlight and is something that I see being utilized in the industry and has importance.
Awesome. It has been so great to have both of you on the podcast. You're giving such a wide breadth of information on this topic. And it's really great to be able to talk about the impacts from consent management all the way to how clients and companies are using AI. I've got two questions I want to end with. The first has to do with a key tip. So, what is one quick actionable tip that our listeners could implement right away in order to boost their digital marketing efforts in the post cookie world?
I'll try to do this really quick. I think we're all familiar with conversion tracking, meaning, your Facebook, Google Ads campaigns. How do they perform? What interactions do users complete on your website or in your app? You can enrich those interactions with a lot of first party data. not only transaction ID, revenue, order value, taxes, shipping, etc., but even email, phone number, address, etc. Of course, hashed, salted, whichever anonymization methods are applicable, but that'll give those big platforms more data to model for the AI to actually fill in the gaps through that modeling. So that would be my quick tip.
And my quick tip is also around one first party data collection, something we've touched on a lot, but begin thinking about how users are navigating your site and what engages with your user in terms of collecting that first party data. Is it going to be a newsletter? Is it going to be a content download or another option to have that exchange of value, not only in setting that up and thinking about what is going to be valuable, but then utilizing tracking on site to make sure that that interaction is optimized, seeing what is working for users, what is not. Really encourage not only testing, because it's typical to look at the checkout funnel to understand how users are converting for purchases, because that's what, sales is number one for most companies. Really having a similar set of importance on that first party data collection so that you continue to iterate and optimize and enrich that first party. As you can tell from our conversation, it kind of touches all the different aspects, and having as strong as possible data set will help throughout the business.
Great advice from you both. And I've got one more question I've got to ask before we let you go. Sort of touched on a little bit. We do live in a world of a ton of information, a little bit of data overload. So, what is the one go to resource that you guys use to cut through all the noise and that keeps you informed, keeps you engaged, and keeps you excited about marketing topics?
Okay. The Marketing Analytics Intersect by Avinash Kaushik. If you're familiar with Avinash, he's actually working at Google as a digital specialist, and he always focuses on one single topic in his newsletter. It's very inspiring. I can only recommend you sign up.
And on my side, a few good resources. One for really specific information around analytics and marketing is the Analytics Power Hour. They do deep dives into specific segments. That is a podcast. It's available anywhere, but they bring on, industry people to discuss similar topics, and they have a lot of great content. I also follow general tech trends. I think it's important to stay up to date on how different companies such as Apple, Google are being regulated, having a global view on what's happening around the world. And to that point, follow journalists such as Kara Swisher is a great tech journalist that has a good insight on that, as well as the podcast Decoder with Nilay Patel. Those are both good resources as well.
Great. Thank you both. We really appreciate your time today. That is all, but if you liked what you heard, please do not forget to subscribe to Data Break by 55 anywhere you like to get your podcast. You can also catch more insights from Rico and Julian with other 55ers featured on our LinkedIn and our blog, The Tea House, which offers a place to ask questions, learn, and browse the latest brand tech insight. Until our next Data Break, stay curious, stay data driven, and continue exploring the world of marketing and data analytics.